After my business partner stole my app idea and left me homeless, my family said I deserved it for being reckless. Living in my car, I received a package from my dead grandmother. Inside was a USB drive, a stock certificate, and a note. They've been planning this since you were 12. The real weapon is in Vault 847. When I opened that vault, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered. 6 months ago, I had a tech startup, a co-founder I trusted like a brother, and a family that showed up to Sunday dinners. Now I was sleeping in my 2009 Honda Civic in a Walmart parking lot, charging my phone at public libraries, and eating protein bars I shoplifted because I've lost all shame about survival. My business partner, Chen, had stolen my algorithm, filed the patent under his name, and raised $40 million from investors using code I'd written in my grandmother's basement. When I tried to fight back, he buried me in legal fees I couldn't afford. My own brother testified in court that I was unstable and had stolen the idea from Derek. My family stopped returning my calls after the lawsuit collapsed. They said I'd embarrassed them, that I should have been more careful about protecting my work, that successful people don't end up homeless over business disputes. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that truth and innovation matter, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps these stories reach others who need hope. Now, let's see what happened next. I'm Maya Chen, no relation to Derek, though that coincidence should have been my first warning sign. 28 years old, MIT graduate, software engineer with 6 years at major tech companies before I decided to build something of my own, something that mattered. 18 months ago, my life looked like the startup dream everyone pretends is achievable if you just work hard enough. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in San Jose, the kind of place where rent took 60% of my income, but at least the building had secure package delivery, and the neighbors were inactively hostile. The apartment had that generic Silicon Valley aesthetic: white walls, laminate floors that tried to look like hardwood, IKEA furniture assembled with missing screws and determination. My desk faced a window overlooking the parking lot, which wasn't inspiring, but the light was good for the 14-hour days I regularly pulled building my prototype. I'd covered one wall with whiteboards mapping out my algorithm architecture, user interface mockups, and market analysis that convinced me this idea could actually work. The idea was an AI assistant for small business inventory management. Not sexy, not the kind of thing that makes headlines or gets you invited to TED Talks, but practical. Something that could actually help the 33 million small businesses in America that were still tracking inventory on spreadsheets or outdated software that hadn't been updated since 2008. My algorithm used machine learning to predict inventory needs based on seasonal patterns, local events, weather data, and purchasing history. It could tell a coffee shop owner exactly how many pounds of beans to order for the week before a local festival, or warn a boutique clothing store that their best-selling jacket would likely sell out based on temperature forecasts and social media trending data. I'd been building at nights and weekends for 2 years while working full-time as a senior software engineer at a cloud computing company. My manager, Patricia, knew about my side project and didn't care as long as I met my deadlines. Most tech workers have side projects. It's practically part of the job description. I met Derek at a startup networking event at a co-working space in Palo Alto. He was charming in that way entrepreneurs learn to be asking good questions, remembering details from previous conversations, making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. He had an MBA from Stanford and 7 years of experience in venture capital. He understood pitch decks, funding rounds, and term sheets in ways I didn't. You're brilliant at building things, he told me over craft beer after the third networking event where we gravitated toward each other. But you need someone who can sell the vision. Engineers always underestimate how much of startup success is storytelling rather than technology. He wasn't wrong. I was great at code architecture and problem solving, but terrible at networking events. Were you? Had to condense complex ideas into elevator pitches that fit between introducing yourself and someone as attention wandering to the next conversation. We officially became co-founders after 6 months of working together on weekends. Derek handled business development, investor relations, and marketing strategy. I handled product development, technical architecture, and engineering. We filed our incorporation documents with a 50-50 equity split and $10,000 each in initial capital. Everything felt legitimate, official, protected by contracts I'd paid an attorney $2,500 to review. My grandmother, Ruth Morgan, died 3 months after Derek and I incorporated. She was 84 years old, sharp-minded until the end, living alone in the same house where she'd raised my mother. She'd been a mathematics professor at a state university for 40 years, the kind of academic who believed in intellectual rigor and documentation. She never married after my grandfather died when I was 6, never remarried or even dated that anyone knew about. She spent her retirement reading academic journals and attending lectures like other people watch television. I was close to her in ways I wasn't with the rest of my family. She understood my love of problem solving, my tendency to get lost in projects for hours without noticing time passing. We'd spend Sunday afternoons in her basement, which she'd converted into a workspace with whiteboards covering every wall, talking through algorithm problems or debating optimal data structures. When she died, I spent a week cleaning out her house before it went up for sale. I found filing cabinets full of research papers, boxes of mathematical journals, and 3 laptops from different decades that she'd used for various projects. I kept the laptops thinking I might find something interesting in her old files. Everything else went to estate sales or donation centers. The funeral was small. My mother, my brother Marcus, a few colleagues from the university, some neighbors who'd known her for decades. Everyone said appropriate things about her brilliant mind and dedication to education. My mother cried quietly. Marcus stood next to his wife, Angela, with an expression that suggested he was mentally calculating how long until he could leave. I didn't cry. I felt this hollow absence that hurt worse than tears. Ruth had believed in me when everyone else thought I was wasting my time building something that already existed in slightly different forms. She'd encouraged me to take risks, to trust my abilities, to not spend my entire career making other people's companies successful while ignoring my own potential. 2 weeks after the funeral, Derek and I closed our first funding round. $2.5 million from Catalyst Ventures, a mid-tier VC firm that specialized in B2B software solutions. The lead partner, James Morrison, had impressive credentials, previous exits at 3 successful startups, connections throughout Silicon Valley, and a reputation for supporting founders through the difficult early stages of building companies. The funding came with conditions that Derek assured me were standard. Catalyst would get 25% equity and 2 board seats. They'd have approval rights on major decisions like additional funding rounds or executive hires. The company valuation was set at $10 million post-money, which Derek said was excellent for a pre-revenue startup. I signed the documents after reading them 3 times and asking my attorney to review everything. She said the terms were aggressive but within normal ranges for seed funding. Just make sure you trust your co-founder, she said. Because these contracts give him significant power if you ever disagree on company direction. I trusted Derek. Why wouldn't I? We'd been working together for 8 months. He'd never given me reason to doubt his integrity or commitment. We celebrated the funding round at an expensive restaurant in Palo Alto, where Derek insisted on ordering champagne that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. This is just the beginning, he said, raising his glass. 2 years from now, we'll be raising a Series A at a $50 million valuation. You'll never have to work for anyone else again. I believed him. I believed in the partnership, in the company we were building, in the future that seemed inevitable if we just worked hard enough and made smart decisions. The problems started slowly, in ways I noticed but convinced myself were normal startup growing pains. Derek began excluding me from investor meetings. At first, he framed it as efficiency. You should focus on product development while I handle the business side. It made sense. I hated investor meetings anyway. The performances where you had to project confidence you didn't feel while pretending your 3-month-old company had everything figured out. But then I'd hear details secondhand that didn't match what Derek had told me. James Morrison mentioned being impressed by our new customer acquisition strategy in an email, but Derek had never discussed any customer acquisition strategy with me. When I asked him about it, he waved it off as just high-level vision stuff. Nothing concrete yet. Derek started working from home more often instead of our shared co-working space. He said he was more productive without distractions, which I understood. But it meant we went from working side by side 40 hours a week to maybe seeing each other twice a week for 30-minute check-in calls. I was too busy building to question it properly. I was working 70-hour weeks finishing the product, debugging code, optimizing performance, preparing for our beta launch with 50 small businesses who had agreed to test the system. The algorithm was working beautifully. Our test users were reporting 20 to 30% reductions in inventory waste and better prediction accuracy than any competing software they had tried. Then, 4 months after our funding round, Derek called an emergency board meeting. He didn't tell me what it was about, just sent a calendar invitation with James Morrison and another Catalyst partner, Rebecca Tam, listed as attendees. I showed up at Catalyst S offices downtown, expecting to discuss our beta results or maybe plans for scaling up. Instead, Derek presented a pitch deck I'd never seen. The deck outlined a pivot in our business strategy. Instead of focusing on small business inventory management, Derek proposed we target enterprise clients, Fortune 500 companies with complex supply chain operations. The technology would be similar in foundation, but require significant architectural changes to handle enterprise-scale data processing. Wait, I said, interrupting Derek's presentation. We've never discussed this. Our entire product is optimized for small business use cases. Enterprise requires completely different. That's why we need to make this change now, Derek interrupted smoothly. Before we're too committed to the wrong market, enterprise contracts are worth millions instead of thousands. Our seed funding won't last if we're only generating $200 monthly subscriptions from mom and pop shops. James Morrison nodded thoughtfully. The economics make sense, Maya. Enterprise sales cycles are longer, but the payoff is substantially larger. This pivot could accelerate our path to profitability significantly. I tried to explain why this didn't work technically. The algorithm I built was specifically designed for businesses with limited data infrastructure. Enterprise clients would need integration with existing ERP systems, compliance with corporate security standards, and scalability I hadn't architected for. We'd basically be starting over. Then we start over, Derek said, with proper enterprise architecture from the beginning. I've already been talking to a development team that specializes in enterprise software. They can have a new version built in 6 months. A new development team? My voice sounded strange even to myself. I'm the technical co-founder. I built the entire system. Why would we hire someone else to rebuild it? Derek exchanged a glance with James that I couldn't interpret. Because Maya, and I say this with respect, you don't have enterprise experience. You've built an impressive prototype for small businesses, but scaling to Fortune 500 companies requires different expertise. The board meeting lasted another 30 minutes, but the decision was already made. Derek had 2 votes, his own and James Morrison's. I had 1 vote. Rebecca Tam abstained, saying she'd deferred to James's judgment on technical pivots. 2 weeks later, Derek changed all the company passwords and locked me out of our GitHub repository. When I showed up at the co-working space, he was there with Angela, my brother Marcus's wife, who I hadn't realized had any connection to our company. "Maya," Derek said with a calmness that made my hands shake, "we need to discuss your role going forward. Angela has been advising me on corporate structure, and we think it as best if you transition to a consulting position rather than remaining as co-founder." Angela smiled with professional sympathy. She was a corporate attorney at one of those firms that have 3 names and offices on every continent. I'd never liked her, but she'd always been polite at family dinners in that distant way that suggested she found my entire family slightly beneath her educational pedigree. "This is a standard restructuring," Angela said, sliding a folder across the table. "Derek will be buying out your equity at the current valuation, which comes to $250,000 based on the post-money valuation from your seed round. That's quite generous considering the company hasn't generated revenue yet." I stared at the documents. $250,000 for half a company we're building? For the algorithm I spent 2 years developing? The algorithm that requires complete rebuilding for our new enterprise focus, Derek corrected. "You'll be fairly compensated for your contributions to date. That the future direction requires different technical expertise. This is theft," I said, hearing my voice rise. "You can't just steal half a company because you got 2 board votes." Angela's expression remained professionally neutral. "You can have your attorney review the documents, but you'll find everything is within the bounds of your operating agreement." As majority board vote, Derek and Catalyst have the authority to restructure equity and roles as they see fit to optimize company success. I called my attorney that afternoon. She reviewed the documents and confirmed what Angela had said. Technically legal, morally indefensible, but legal. The operating agreement I'd signed gave the board broad authority to make structural changes. And with Derek controlling 2 of 3 votes, I had no recourse through company governance. "You can fight this," my attorney said, "but litigation would cost at least $200,000, probably more. And you'd be fighting for years against a company with $2.5 million in funding. They can outlast you financially. The buyout offer might be your best option." I refused the buyout. I didn't want money for something I'd built and believed in. I wanted to keep building it. That's when things got worse. Derek filed for a patent on AI-driven inventory prediction using multi-factor analysis, my algorithm with himself listed as sole inventor. When I tried to challenge the patent application with evidence that I developed the technology, Derek produced documents showing he'd been advising me on the algorithm design since before we'd officially become co-founders. Email threads I didn't remember sending. Technical documents with his name on them that I'd supposedly co-authored. I knew those documents were fabricated or manipulated, but proving it required forensic analysis I couldn't afford. Then my family got involved in the worst possible way. My brother Marcus called me for the first time in 2 months. "Maya, Angela told me what's happening with your company. I think you need to accept that you're in over your head here. Derek has been incredibly patient, but you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Marcus, he's stealing my work. The algorithm is mine. I can prove." "You're embarrassing yourself," Marcus interrupted, "and you're embarrassing the family. Angela's firm has a reputation to protect, and having her sister-in-law accuse one of her clients of theft isn't a good look." Her client? Angela is representing Derek. She's advising him on corporate structure. It's not a conflict of interest since you're not technically a client. "Maya, just take the bailout and move on. Not every business idea works out. That's not a personal failure, it's just reality," my mother called next. "Marcus told me you've been difficult about this business situation. Honey, I know you're disappointed, but you need to think about your future. If you keep fighting Derek, you'll get a reputation for being litigious. No one will want to hire you. I don't want to be hired. I want to keep building my company. Your company? My mother's voice carried that particular tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. Sweetheart, Derek is the CEO. He's the one with the business experience. You're a very talented programmer, but running a company is different from writing code. Maybe this is a sign you should focus on what you're actually good at. I hired a different attorney and filed suit challenging the patent and the equity restructuring. It cost $15,000 upfront that I paid using my savings and 2 credit cards. Derek buried me in motions and counterclaims. Every filing cost me money I didn't have. Discovery requests that required me to produce thousands of documents. Depositions where Derek's attorneys asked me detailed questions about my development process, then used my answers to construct arguments that I'd actually been implementing Derek's vision rather than creating original work. My attorney warned me that we were losing. Their legal budget is unlimited. They can file motions forever until you run out of money. Unless you can find funding for this litigation, you're going to have to settle or drop the suit. I tried crowdfunding. Posted my story online explaining what had happened, asking for support from other founders who'd been screwed by partners or investors. I raised $3,000 before. Derek's attorneys sent a cease and desist claiming I was defaming him and tortiously interfering with Catalyst's business relationships. 6 months after the lawsuit started, I ran out of money. My attorney filed a motion to withdraw from the case. The judge dismissed my claims with prejudice, meaning I couldn't refile. Derek's patent was approved. His company, which he'd renamed Inventrack Solutions, announced a Series A funding round of $40 million. I lost my apartment because I couldn't pay rent. Lost my job because I'd been spending 40 hours a week on the lawsuit instead of focusing on work. And Patricia finally lost patience with my declining performance. Lost my car insurance because I forgot to pay it during everything else that was falling apart. My brother Marcus testified in court during the final hearing before the dismissal. He stood in the witness stand wearing an expensive suit and explained that I'd always been obsessive and unstable about my projects, that I'd had a history of claiming credit for collaborative work and struggling to accept feedback from people with more experience. None of that was true, but Marcus delivered it with the calm authority of someone who genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, he pulled me aside. "I hope you understand this isn't personal," he said. "Angela asked me to testify about your history, and I had to be honest. You've always had trouble collaborating, Maya. Remember that group project in college where you insisted on rewriting everyone else's code because you didn't think it was good enough? This is the same pattern." I stared at him and realized I didn't recognize my own brother. The person I'd grown up with, who I taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and defended from bullies in middle school, that person wouldn't have done this. But somewhere along the way, he'd become someone else. Someone who valued his wife's career advancement and family reputation over his sister's life. I started living in my car that week, a 2009 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles and a check engine light that had been on for so long I'd stopped noticing it. I parked in different Walmart lots each night to avoid security noticing I was sleeping there. Showered at Planet Fitness using a $10 monthly membership I could barely afford. Charged my phone at public libraries while applying for jobs that never called back because my references were burned and my LinkedIn profile attracted messages from recruiters who stopped responding when they realized I'd just lost a major lawsuit. I ate protein bars, ramen cooked in a portable hot pot, using power from library outlets, and whatever food samples I could get at Costco on weekends. I lost 15 pounds in 2 months. My family stopped answering my calls entirely. I tried texting my mother, explaining that I was living in my car, asking if I could stay with her for a few weeks while I figured things out. She texted back. Marcus and Angela explained everything. I think you need professional help, Maya. I love you, but I can't enable this destructive pattern. When you're ready to accept responsibility for your choices, we can talk. That text arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was sitting in the parking lot of a library, eating a protein bar for dinner, trying not to cry because crying required energy I couldn't spare. The package arrived at the library. I'd been using the public library on Market Street as my mailing address for the past month, receiving mail through their general delivery service. Most of my mail was debt collection notices and court documents, but this package was different. Brown paper wrapping, my name written in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Ruth's careful, precise script that looked like it had been written with a ruler. The postmark was dated 3 days after her death 9 months ago. I sat in my car in the library parking lot, staring at the package, trying to understand how my grandmother had mailed something to me 9 months after her death at an address ID only started using a month ago. Inside was a USB drive, a stock certificate printed on heavy paper with ornate borders, and a handwritten note. Maya, if you're receiving this, it means you've lost everything fighting for something you built. I knew this would happen. They've been planning it since you were 12 years old. The stock certificate is for shares in a company called Helix Technologies. But the real weapon is what S on the USB drive and what S waiting in Vault 847 at First National Bank downtown. The password is your birthday plus mine. Mindy. Your family isn't what you think they are. Your brother isn't your brother. Finish what I started. Make them answer for what they did to your grandfather and what they're doing to you. Trust mathematics. Numbers don't lie the way people do. Ruth, I read the note 5 times. Each reading made less sense than the previous one. Stock certificate worth $8 million. My brother isn't my brother. Vault 847. Your family isn't what you think. I pulled out my laptop, connected to the library Wi-Fi, and researched Helix Technologies. They'd been acquired by a major tech conglomerate in 1998, and the stock had split multiple times since Ruth's original purchase. If her math was correct, and it always was, $5,000 invested in 1983 would now be worth somewhere between $8 to $12 million, depending on market conditions. The USB drive contained a single encrypted folder. I tried the password. Ruth had specified my birth date plus hers, and it opened to reveal hundreds of files organized by year, going back to 1987. I started with the most recent files. There was a document titled Maya_surveillance_2015-present.pdf. I opened it. Page after page of surveillance logs tracking my movements, my relationships, my project development. The log started in 2015, 3 years before I met Derek, and continued right up until 2 months before Ruth died. June 3rd, 2016, Maya attended Tech Innovators Meet at Palo Alto Co-working. Chen approached her during networking session. Conversation lasted 12 minutes. Topics: her inventory prediction project, his VC experience. Note: Derek filed report with Ruth Morgan Chen same evening, confirming contact established. August 14th, 2016, Maya and Derek had coffee at Blue Bottle, Market Street location. Maya showed prototype demo. Derek took notes and photos. Note: files were uploaded to Catalyst Ventures. Shared drive within 2 hours of meeting. December 2nd, 2016, Maya and Derek filed incorporation documents. Derek hadn't randomly met me at a networking event. He had been assigned to approach me, to befriend me, to position himself as co-founder so he could eventually steal everything I built. I kept reading. There was an email thread between Ruth Morgan Chen, my brother's wife, James Morrison, Catalyst Ventures, and someone named David Reeves at a law firm I didn't recognize. From Ruth Morgan Chen to James Morrison. David Reeves date, April 3rd, 2015 subject. Maya Morgan monitoring James, confirming that Maya has started development on inventory prediction software. Based on her graduate research and current project trajectory, she should have a working prototype within 18 to 24 months. Recommend positioning Derek as early-stage collaborator rather than waiting until prototype is complete. Early involvement gives us better control over IP documentation and creates plausible deniability for acquisition. My husband, Marcus, can provide character testimony if patent disputes arise. Family testimony is particularly effective in undermining opposing claims. Let me know when you want to move forward. Angela, my brother's wife, had been monitoring me for years, reporting on my project development, planning how to steal my work before I'd even met Derek, and Marcus had known. He'd testified in court calling me unstable and obsessive, not because he believed it, but because Angela had asked him to undermine my credibility as part of a coordinated strategy. I felt nauseous. The protein bar I'd eaten was sitting wrong in my stomach. I put my laptop aside and sat with my head against the steering wheel, trying to breathe properly. Then I opened the next folder, family_history_1960 to 2025. The first document was a birth certificate for Marcus Andrew Chen, born in Shanghai, China, adopted by Ruth as daughter Catherine Morgan, my mother, in 1991. The adoption was finalized when Marcus was 3 years old. Marcus was adopted. I'd never known. No one had ever mentioned it. Every family story about Marcus's childhood had positioned him as my mother's biological child, born 2 years before me. But according to these documents, Marcus was adopted from China through an agency called Pacific Adoption Services, the same agency where Angela Morgan Chen's mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, had worked as director from 1985 to 2004. I opened another file. Pacific_Services_Services_Fraud_Investigation_1995 to 2003. Ruth had documented years of research into the adoption agency. Apparently, Pacific Adoption Services had been investigated by federal authorities for falsifying adoption documents, bribing Chinese officials, and operating an illegal baby-selling ring disguised as legitimate adoptions. Dr. Sarah Chen had been indicted in 2003, but never prosecuted. The case was dropped after key witnesses recanted their testimony. According to Ruth's notes, my grandfather, her husband, Robert Morgan, had been one of the federal investigators working the case. In 2004, Robert Morgan died in a hiking accident, fell off a trail in the mountains during a solo hike. His body was found 3 days later. Ruth's notes indicated she believed the accident wasn't accidental, that Robert had been murdered because he'd collected evidence linking Dr. Sarah Chen to organized crime networks in China that facilitated illegal adoptions, that his death had been made to look like an accident to close the investigation he'd been building. I sat in my car trying to process what I was reading. My grandfather was murdered because he was investigating an illegal adoption ring. Marcus was adopted through that ring. Angela's mother ran that ring. And somehow 15 years after my grandfather's death, the same network that had killed him was now positioned to steal my company. The connections were too precise to be coincidence. Marcus married to Angela, whose mother had run the adoption agency. Angela working at a corporate law firm that represented Catalyst Ventures. Derek positioned as my co-founder by Catalyst. The whole architecture of my life had been designed by people who saw me as a long-term investment target. But why? Why would a Chinese organized crime network care about stealing a software algorithm from a 28-year-old engineer? I opened the final document in Ruth's files. Chen_network_technology_acquisition_strategy_2010 present. Ruth had mapped out a pattern. Pacific Adoption Services hadn't just been facilitating illegal adoptions. They'd been placing children with American families who worked in technology, defense, and pharmaceuticals. creating a network of adopted children who would grow up American, attend American universities, build American technology, and then have their innovations quietly transferred to Chinese companies through business partnerships that looked legitimate on the surface. Marcus had been placed with my family because Ruth's daughter, my mother, worked in university administration where she had access to emerging research and talented students. I'd even the unexpected bonus, a daughter who turned out to have exceptional technical abilities and was naive enough to be exploited. The adoption placements were long-term investments. The network would wait decades if necessary, monitoring the adopted children and their families, looking for opportunities to acquire valuable technology or intelligence through relationships that seemed organic but were actually designed from childhood. I was an acquisition target before I could even code. According to Ruth's research, the network had successfully acquired at least 47 technologies over the past 15 years through similar strategies. Small innovations that never made headlines but were collectively worth billions. Software algorithms, manufacturing processes, medical devices, chemical formulas, all developed by American engineers who were betrayed by people they'd known their entire lives. Ruth had been documenting everything since my grandfather's death, tracking the network's operations, collecting evidence, trying to build a case that federal authorities would actually prosecute instead of dismissing. And she'd set up that stock portfolio to give me the financial resources to fight back when they inevitably came for me. The note had mentioned Vault 847 at First National Bank downtown. I drove there, which took 15 minutes, and nearly depleted my gas tank below the level where I felt comfortable. The bank was one of those old institutions with marble floors and columns that projected stability and permanence. I approached a customer service representative and asked about accessing Vault 847. She checked her computer, made a phone call, and 10 minutes later, a manager appeared. "Ms. Morgan, your grandmother set up this vault in 2004 with specific instructions that it could only be accessed by you. I'll need to see identification." I showed her my driver's license, even though the address on it was no longer valid. The manager led me downstairs to a vault room lined with safety deposit boxes. She used her key and the key Ruth had included in the package to open box 847. Inside was a fireproof document box containing complete copies of my grandfather's original investigation files, including witness statements, financial records, and surveillance photos, recorded phone conversations between Dr. Sarah Chen and various associates discussing technology acquisition targets. Detailed financial trails showing money flowing from shell companies in Hong Kong to American investment firms, including Catalyst Ventures. Patent filings showing patterns where innovations developed by American engineers were simultaneously filed by Chinese companies weeks after acquisition deals closed. A handwritten journal from my grandfather dated weeks before his death, explaining that he believed his investigation had been compromised and that he was being followed, and underneath all of that, a letter addressed to me. "Maya, if you've made it this far, you understand now. Your entire life has been surveillance. Your family has been compromised. The people you trust are actors playing roles designed to keep you compliant and exploitable. I couldn't prove what happened to Robert while I was alive. Every attempt I made to interest federal authorities in the case was dismissed. They thought I was a paranoid widow seeing conspiracies everywhere. But you're not paranoid. You're a mathematician and an engineer. You understand evidence and proof. The USB drive contains everything you need to understand the network's operations. This vault contains everything you need to prove what they did to Robert and what they were doing to you." Agent Christina Park at the FBI's Economic Espionage Division has been quietly investigating Chen network operations for 3 years. She's trustworthy. Her contact information is in the vault. The stock portfolio will fund your legal battle and keep you secure while you fight. Make them answer for what they did to Robert. Make them answer for what they're doing to you and the 47 other engineers they've exploited. You were always the brilliant one, Maya, even when you were 12 and explaining algorithm theory to me in ways that made me realize you surpassed my understanding. They saw that brilliance and wanted to own it. Show them what happens when you underestimate a mathematician. Ruth. I sat on the floor of the vault room with Ruth's letter in my hands and cried for the first time in months. Not hopeless crying like I'd been suppressing for weeks, but angry, determined crying that came with clarity about what needed to happen next. Ruth had spent 20 years building a case. She protected me financially so I could finish what she and my grandfather had started. She documented everything with the precision of a mathematician who understood that proof matters more than narrative. And now she was handing me the weapon I needed to burn down everyone who tried to own my life. I cashed in the stock certificate the next day. $8.4 million transferred to a new bank account I'd opened specifically for this purpose. I paid off my dad's first credit cards, legal fees, my student loans. Then I used $50,000 to rent a modest one-bedroom apartment with 3 months deposit. Bought groceries. Bought clothes that weren't threadbare. Paid for a full tank of gas without calculating if I could afford it. For 1 week, I just existed as a person instead of as someone in constant crisis mode. I slept in an actual bed. I showered without timing how long I could use the gym facilities before someone noticed. I ate meals that required cooking rather than microwaving. I let myself feel human again before starting the war. Then I called Agent Christina Park. She answered on the second ring. Park, my name is Maya Morgan. My grandmother Ruth Morgan left me information about the Chen network and technology acquisition operations. I think you've been investigating them. Silence on the other end for long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Where are you right now? Christina asked, her voice completely changed from the professional greeting. Home, San Jose. Stay there. Don't talk to anyone else about this. I'm coming to you. I'll be there in 4 hours. Christina arrived in 3 hours, 45 minutes, which suggested she'd driven faster than was probably legal. She was in her mid-40s, Korean American, wearing business casual with an FBI badge on her belt. She sat at my apartment's small dining table and reviewed the files. I deprinted from Ruth's USB drive with an intensity that made me understand why Ruth had trusted her. Your grandmother contacted me 2 years ago, Christina said after reading for 20 minutes. She tried to interest me in investigating what happened to your grandfather. I looked into it, but the case was 15 years cold and I didn't have enough to justify reopening it officially. But you kept investigating unofficially, I said. Christina smiled slightly. Your grandmother was persistent, and her documentation was excellent. She'd mapped out connections I'd been trying to prove for 3 years. Maya, you just handed me enough evidence to open a federal investigation into economic espionage, racketeering, and possibly murder. The investigation moved faster than I expected, probably because Christina had already been building her case for years and Ruth's evidence filled the gaps that had prevented prosecution. Subpoenas were issued for Catalyst Ventures' financial records. Derek was surprised at his office by federal agents who wanted to discuss his relationship with Angela Morgan Chen and the timeline of his involvement with my company. James Morrison's computers were seized during a raid on Catalyst's offices. Dr. Sarah Chen was arrested at her home in Portland on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit economic espionage. The news showed her being led out in handcuffs past neighbors, who'd known her for decades as a respected adoption services professional. Marcus was arrested at the corporate law firm where he worked. According to Christina, he'd been actively involved in facilitating technology transfers for at least 5 years. He used his position at the firm to identify acquisition targets and coordinate legal strategies to strip IP from American engineers. Angela was indicted on 23 counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder in my grandfather's death. Her attorney issued a statement claiming she'd been manipulated by her mother and hadn't understood the full scope of the network's operations. But Ruth's files included recordings of Angela discussing technology acquisition targets and specifically identifying me as optimal for long-term cultivation because of family trust factors. The trial started 6 months after the arrests. The media covered it extensively because it had everything: organized crime, Chinese espionage, murdered federal investigators, stolen technology, family betrayal. I testified for 2 days about Derek's theft of my algorithm, about Angela's surveillance, about Marcus's perjured testimony. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as a disgruntled former business partner who was vindictive about a failed startup. But Ruth's documentation showed planning that predated my company by years. The surveillance logs showing Derek had been assigned to approach me. The emails between Angela and Catalyst discussing when to position Derek as co-founder. The adoption records connecting Marcus to Dr. Sarah Chen's illegal network. The jury deliberated for 8 days. Derek was convicted on fraud and conspiracy charges, 12 years in federal prison. Catalyst Ventures was dissolved, and James Morrison was sentenced to 15 years for his role in coordinating the technology theft operations. Dr. Sarah Chen received 25 years for operating the illegal adoption ring and an additional 15 for conspiracy to commit murder in my grandfather's death. She was 73 years old, which meant she'd likely die in prison. Angela received 18 years for her role in facilitating technology transfers and obstruction of justice. Marcus received 10 years. He showed no emotion when the verdict was read, just stood with his hands folded and stared at the judge. Afterward, his attorney released a statement saying Marcus had been a victim of the adoption network and had been groomed from childhood to participate in activities he didn't fully understand. I didn't believe it. Marcus had made choices as an adult. He'd chosen to testify against me in court. He'd chosen to help Angela identify me as a target. He'd chosen his position in the network over any loyalty to the family who'd raised him. My mother attended the trial every day, sitting in the gallery looking progressively more broken. She'd genuinely not known about the adoption conspiracy or the technology theft operation. She'd believed Marcus was her biological son and that Angela was just an ambitious attorney. When the verdict was read and Marcus was led away in handcuffs, my mother cried quietly in the hallway outside the courtroom. I approached her carefully, not sure if she'd want to talk to me. "I'm sorry," she said before I could say anything. "I believed them when they said you were unstable. I believed Marcus when he said you were making false accusations. I chose to trust my son over my daughter, and I was wrong about everything." We stood together in that courthouse hallway while she cried, and I held her hand. I didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't, but I didn't tell her I'd never forgive her because I might eventually. Forgiveness is a long process that doesn't fit into courthouse moments. The patent for my algorithm was invalidated based on evidence that Derek had fraudulently claimed invention. I filed a new patent under my own name, and it was approved within 6 months. I used $3 million from Ruth's stock portfolio to start a new company, Morgan Innovations. I hired a small team of engineers I'd known from previous jobs, people I trusted and could verify weren't connected to any networks trying to steal my work. We launched the inventory prediction software under a new brand. Within 8 months, we had 2,000 paying customers, actual small businesses that benefited from better inventory management and wanted to pay fair subscription prices for software that worked. I raised a Series A round from investors Christina Park helped me vet, ensuring none of them had connections to economic espionage networks. We closed $15 million at a $60 million valuation. This time, I controlled the board and the equity structure. Even Track Solutions, Derek's company built on my stolen algorithm, collapsed within a year of his conviction. Investors pulled out. Enterprise clients canceled contracts when they discovered the technology was based on theft. The company was liquidated in bankruptcy proceedings, and the assets were auctioned off. I bought the assets for $400,000, not because I needed them, but because I wanted Derek to know that everything he'd stolen had ended up back with me anyway. I used another $2 million from Ruth's trust to establish the Ruth Morgan Foundation for Technology Ethics. The foundation provides legal defense funding for engineers and inventors fighting against IP theft. We've helped 23 people in the past 2 years recover stolen technology or get fair compensation from partners who tried to exploit them. We also fund research into adoption fraud and human trafficking networks that operate under the cover of legitimate international adoption services. Christina Park serves on our advisory board, helping us identify networks still operating and connecting survivors with resources. My mother and I have dinner together once a month now. Our relationship will never be what it was before. Too much trust was broken. Too many choices can't be undone. But we're building something new. Something more honest, where we acknowledge that families can be complicated and forgiveness is work, not a decision you make once and consider resolved. I never responded to the letters Marcus sent from prison. He writes every few months, long explanations about how he was groomed from childhood and didn't understand what he was doing, how he regrets testifying against me, how he hopes we can reconcile someday. Maybe we will. Maybe in 10 years when he's released, we'll have a conversation where he takes actual responsibility instead of positioning himself as a victim. But I don't owe him that reconciliation just because we share a mother and a childhood. Ruth's death was ruled natural. She died of heart failure at 84, which is sad but not suspicious. But I think the stress of spending 20 years documenting a network that killed her husband probably contributed to that heart failure. She'd carried the weight of proof alone for 2 decades, while everyone dismissed her as paranoid. I wish she'd lived to see the trial, to see Dr. Sarah Chen convicted, to see me standing in court testifying with her documentation as evidence, to know that everything she'd spent years building had actually mattered, but she knew it would matter. That's why she built it. She trusted that eventually someone would find her evidence and understand what it meant. She trusted me to finish what she and my grandfather started. I keep her letter from the vault framed in my office. The part where she says, "Show them what happens when you underestimate a mathematician." That's what I did. That's what I'm still doing. I built a profitable company that actually helps people. I exposed a network that exploited 47 engineers and stole billions in technology. I helped convict the people who murdered my grandfather and tried to steal my life. And I did it all using the weapon Ruth spent 20 years building meticulously documented proof that numbers don't lie the way people do. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in my car in a Walmart parking lot, eating protein bars, and wondering if I'd ever recover from being systematically destroyed by people I'd trusted. Now I'm a CEO with a profitable company, a published inventor with my own patents, and the founder of an organization that is helping other engineers fight back against the people who try to exploit them. Derek thought he could steal my work and bury me in legal fees. Marcus thought his testimony would discredit me permanently. Angela thought her corporate law expertise would protect the network. They all underestimated what a mathematician with complete documentation can accomplish. And that was their biggest mistake. If this story of justice and resilience kept you captivated until the very end, show your support by hitting that like button right now. My favorite part was when Maya discovered Ruth's 20-year investigation and realized her paranoid grandmother had been documenting everything all along. What was your favorite moment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of truth and redemption like this one. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're notified the instant we upload.